I welcome you to CEC lecture series. I am Nupur Chawla, teaching English literature at Metri College, Delhi University. This lecture is second part of the lecture that is titled Metaphysical Poets, Donne. In the first part of this lecture, we talked about what do we mean by metaphysical poets, who were they, what are the essential features of this kind of poetry, and we also discussed about the important concept of the metaphysical conceit, right? Now, in this part of the lecture, we are going to do two things. A, we are going to understand the historical background of the 17th century, which is when the metaphysical poets were writing, and at the same time, we will look at briefly some portion of the Canonization, which is a poem by John Donne. Okay, now let us look at what exactly was happening in England during the 17th century. Right now, as we said, that metaphysical poetry emerged in English cultural life at a time of uncertainty. First thing is, the important word is uncertainty, which means that there were a lot of changes that were happening in the, I would say, a socio-political scenario of the time. Now, you would wonder, you would want to understand that what were these changes? Why was there a sense of uncertainty in the 17th century? Now, you see, it was a period of political and ideological clashes. One, finding it difficult to tie oneself with a strong sense of belief. It was a time when there was a lot of clash of political stances and ideological stances as well. And one would find it very difficult to, tie oneself to one particular strong belief. The other thing is that monarchy existed at the time as a crucial governing factor. But the arrangement of the court was not as stable as it was in the 16th century. So, on the one hand, there was a clash of ideologies and political positions. On the other hand, even the monarchy was not stable, right? It was on shaky grounds if we compare it to the preceding century, which was the 16th century, right? Now, you might wonder that what do we mean by the statement that monarchy was on a shaky ground? Let's understand this a bit further. Now, you see, Queen Elizabeth herself, she did not command as much respect as she did in the 1580s, which is the 16th century. As cliques also, they raised head and conspired to disturb the harmony for their petty gains. So this was that time when there were small groups that were raising against Queen Elizabeth. They were raising a voice against Queen Elizabeth. They also conspired to disturb the harmony of the court, of the life in general, for just very petty gains of theirs. So this was one of the reasons why also monarchy was destabilized. Now, Queen Elizabeth, she died in 1603, which is right in the beginning of the 17th century. And this brought about a change from the Tudor dynasty to the Stuarts. Now, these were the lines of emperors in English history, right? So there was a change from the Tudor dynasty to the Stuarts, and this had traumatized a large section of the populace in terms of loyalty and faith. They did not know who to be loyal to, because their loyalties were already with the Tudors. But then, with this sudden shift of power, it kind of disbalanced the people. Now, that is how at the political level or at the governance level or in monarchy, things were shifting. They were not very stable, right? Now, in the matters of social living and religious faith, the Englishmen moved on a shaky ground further. How? Now, the common feeling was neither physical nor spiritual predominantly. It could only be described as, therefore, metaphysical, which means beyond the physical and spiritual, something that was weird and deeply disturbing. So, which means what? That even along, in society or in religious faith, there was no, I would say, one clear approach to spirituality. So it wasn't that there was a focus on, the materiality, or there was focus on, spirituality per se, right? Instead, therefore, I mean, there was neither of the two. And the only thing that could, or the only word, therefore, that could describe such an atmosphere was metaphysical. Now, the word meta means beyond, right? So, therefore, we say beyond the physical and the spiritual, and something that was weird and deeply disturbing. So, that is how, uncertainty, which was at the root of 17th century historical period, in terms of monarchy, in terms of social and religious practice, and also in terms of just the general feeling of the times as well, that it gave rise to this idea of the metaphysical, right? That's what we say, that all these trends which appear in history, they are born out of the historical conditions of the time, right? It is not so because, for example, modernism, which comes in the 20th century, was also a result of a certain, I would say, historical political conditions. Likewise, even metaphysical poetry in the 17th century was a result of this sense of uncertainty, and hence the kind of features or the poetic processes that we see in the poetry of the time, right? Now, the next thing that we say is that metaphysical poetry broke the existing, I would say, understanding or features of writing poetry, and it drove people towards self-examination. Now, internal feelings and processes of thought, they became new areas of interest. It led away from the dramatic mode and looked for the private and the personal domain of individuals. So, the private and the personal, the internal feelings and processes of thoughts became very important. Now, remember in the previous lecture, we were also discussing that how one of the central features of 17th century metaphysical poetry is, an argument or a dialogue, right? So, once again, what does it indicate? The internal feelings and the processes of thought. So, therefore, focus on the private and the personal domain of the individuals, right? Now, it has been rightly observed by Ronald Carter and John McRae. Now, they comment on this, feature of metaphysical poetry. Now, let's look at this quote. In the book, The Routledge History of English Literature, it is said, while there was the most, while theatre was the most public literary form of the period meaning the 17th century period, poetry tended to be more personal and more private. Indeed, it was often published for only a limited circle of readers. And this was true of Shakespeare's sonnets, and even more so for the metaphysical poets, whose words were published mostly after their death, unquote. Now, what we see over here is that, Carter and McRae, they highlight that how while during the 17th century, theatre was a dominant form, but at the same time, poetry, was also published, but it had a particular feature It was more personal, it was more private, right? And he says that while we see these features in sonnets of Shakespeare as well, at the same time, metaphysical poets, their poetry was also defined by this, right? So this was primarily the historical background of the 17th century, which gave rise to this kind of poetry. Now let us come to discussing a bit about John Donne and this very important poem by John Donne that is called as a Canonization. Now, of course, it's a 5-stanza poem, but in this lecture we are going to talk about 2 stanzas, and perhaps in the lecture which follows we will continue discussing canonization and also discuss the poems by other metaphysical poets as well, right? Now, coming back to John Donne, now we had established him as an important metaphysical poet. He was born in 1572 and was around till 1631, and he was a poet, a priest and a soldier in the 16th, 17th century England. Now, he was born into a Catholic family at a time when Roman Catholicism was an illegal faith. It was the Church of England that was the religious center, and the king was deemed to be the supreme authority there. So, what do we see here? That John Donne is born into a setup which, right at the outset, is kind of unconventional. He is born into a family that practices Roman Catholicism, but it's the Church of England, which whose faith was, I would say Anglican, right, or the Protestant. That was the one which was at the center of the religious scene in 17th century England. Now, in a turn of events, John Donne wrote 2 anti-Catholic polemics as well. One was called Pseudo Martyr in 1610, and the other was Ignatius his Conclave in 1611. Now, he wrote anti-Catholic polemics. Why? Because, of course, such was the, I would say, religious trend or the religious thought of the times. Now, King James was highly impressed with Donne's work, and he asked him to take holy orders, and he became a priest in the Church of England in 1590. Now, imagine. You see, that's how literature is connected with essential aspects of life. Now, he writes poems which are, anti-Catholic, and at the center is the Church of England, and whose authority is the king, and the king is impressed by this, and he makes John Donne a priest of the Church of England, right? So, we see how religion and power then come together to work in the social life. Now, thereafter, John Donne served as the Dean of St. Paul's Cathedral in London from 1621 to 1631. So, we see that, his proximity to the church, the cathedral, also then would show in his works as well, right? So, the poem that we are going to discuss today by John Donne is called as the Canonization. Now, the title itself is very interesting. Why? Because the word canonization means in Roman Catholicism the official admission of a dead person into sainthood. So, somebody is canonized after they are dead, right? Which means that they are declared a saint on their death. So, that process in Christianity, particularly Roman Catholicism, is called as canonization. Now, he takes this as the title of the poem. Now, this gives you the first impression that, oh, maybe he might be talking about this religious process, or he might just be reflecting on it. But what he does is actually just the opposite. And again, connected to the metaphysical conceit. I mean, this is of course not a conceit, but that is, one of the features of metaphysical poets, that they like to shock the reader, right? Coming back to canonization, now it is generally related to the region of spirituality, as we just now said. Now, as the raised level of, now you see, when the person who's dead and his level is raised to that of a saint, as the raised level is recognized and finally accepted by society, the person concerned earns additional esteem or respect and is looked up to by the people. And under Christianity, the person is of the level of the saint, right? So that is a process of canonization. He's accepted by society and earns this kind of a respect, but after death, right? And is raised to the level of a saint. Now, you see, we also notice that canonization, right, as we just now said, is this what Donne is talking about in the poem? No, right? In fact, he goes on and talks about something very different. So therefore, the foremost thing that the poem achieves is that the poem challenges convention and it unsettles the reader with its straightforwardness, right? Even with the title itself, the way he's used it tells us that no conventional understanding is going to help the reader understand the poem. And there's a very, sharp straightforwardness, does not mince words, directly states the point, and certain points which are also jarring at times, right? Now, we say that what exactly then does he do in this poem? So on the one hand, we've said that, Donne had a profound belief in matters of spirit and grace and dimensions that he constantly explores in his religious poetry. But here in the poem Canonization, he explores love and its power to transcend interests of privilege, comfort, and wealth. He fiercely argues in support for celebratory intimacy with the woman lover. Now imagine using a religious title, but the topic, but the idea is incredibly secular. He's talking about love and its power to transcend, to go beyond interests of privilege, comfort, and wealth. That how love as an experience, as an emotion, is much bigger than questions of privilege, comfort, and wealth. Now, how do all these ideas come about? Let us first look at the first stanza of the poem. The poet says, and I quote, "For God's sake, hold your tongue and let me love, or chide my palsy or my gout, my 5 grey hairs or ruined fortune flout. With wealth your state, your mind with arts improve, take you a course, get you a place, observe his honour or his grace, or the king's real or his stamped face, contemplate what you will approve, so you will let me love." These lines are actually oft quoted. Hold your tongue and let me love. That's how he begins the stanza. And towards the end also he says, contemplate or what you will approve, so you will let me love. So there's an urgency. Remember in the previous lecture we were saying that at the center is a dialogue. Once again, there's a conversation between the lover and let's say the onlookers. The poetic voice says, let me be with my beloved. Do not interfere, right? Do not talk. That's why he says, hold your tongue, right? Don't talk much. Let me do my thing. Let me, engage with my beloved in the manner that I want. But let us look at, closely. What exactly is he saying further in the stanza? Now, in the beginning of a dialogue, now it is the beginning of a dialogue between the lover and also the beloved, and the former, that is the lover being I, and the beloved being you. Also, it is a stanza of 9 lines, right? And these 9 lines, they form one sentence. So again, a lot of experiment with form as well, right? Now, the first line is in the form of an assertion. For God's sake, hold your tongue and let me love. the word your could refer to the beloved, or it could also refer to the people around, right? He says, don't talk. Let us focus on this given moment. Now, it begs the question whether reference to God in the line here is provocative and might shock the believers, because you see, he's using God's reference to talk about a moment of love between the lover and the beloved. But the sentence has not yet ended, right? So once again, we see what? A tendency to shock. Now the second line, it moves unstoppably from there on to the ninth line. In this lens, the point is made that the beloved may concentrate on various disparate things which are catalogued in the stanza. Now, that is, if you look at the things, he says that for God's sake, hold your tongue and let me love, or chide my palsy or my gout. He says, look at my palsy or my gout. All these are, physical, deformities. Or look at my 5 grey hairs, or ruined fortune's flout. With wealth your state, your mind with arts improve. Take you a course, get you a place. Observe his honour or his grace. Or look at the king's real or stamped face, right? Look at my grey hair, or look at the king's actual face or the stamped face. You can take any of these and contemplate and focus on them, right? Anything that your mind approves of, but stay quiet, right? That is what, the second line, which goes on up till ninth without a full stop, tells us. Right? It's a kind of a cataloging, which is a device which is used by Donne here. Now, the beloved has any or all these options to adopt. However, the poet lover impatiently demands of her to know, so, and I quote, so you will let me love, unquote. We can call it a total commitment to love, right? That's what the first stanza looks like, where the poet wants complete attention, no distraction, and says that even if you want to focus on anything outside, be it my grey hair, king's seal, king's actual face, do that, right? But let us focus. Let's come to the next stanza of the poem. It says, alas, alas, who's injured my love? What merchant's ships have my sighs drowned? Who says my tears have overflowed his ground? When did my colds of forward spring remove? When did the heats which fill my which my veins fill add one man to the plaguey bill? Soldiers find wars and lawyers find out still litigious men which quarrels move, though she and I do love. Now, in the second stanza, you see the idea is expanded further to cover areas of life that ensure stability in trade and commerce. Now, he goes on and he talks about all those things which might be going on at the given point of time while he is enjoying or while he is part of the moment with his beloved. Now, the poet has decided to steer clear of all these fields mentioned, right? So, nor would he disturb any who has joined any of these fields of their own will. Also, he would not disturb the course of nature, nor would be a cause of spreading a disease, that being not his wish or plan, right? So, this list of rejections then includes the debates and dissensions even lawyers indulge in. So, he is here doing nothing but talking about all the different fields, all the different activities that are going on in the world, but he chooses to stay away from them. And at the end of all of these, references, he makes a declaration of his sole intent, which is what? And I quote, that she and I do love, unquote. So indeed, all the worldly options available to the poet lover lacked appeal. The only one person that would ever think of considering is what the poet is hankering after, that is of loving, right? So, in the first two stanzas, we see that urgency, remember, that we had talked about in the previous lecture. We notice this kind of a dialogue which is at the center of the poem. Third, we notice this tendency to shock. Shock how? He's talking about God and love, God and also the moment of love between the two lovers in the same breath, right? Fifth, he is using the title Canonization, which sets up the reader that as if it is going to be about something religious, right? But in its stead, he talks about the, I would say something which is about love, that is the power of love, right? So these first two stanzas of the poem Canonization then help us situate the essential features that we had talked about of metaphysical poetry, right? So in the next lecture, we're going to discuss the other stanzas of canonization and also look at further certain other metaphysical poets in order to understand this trend better. Thank you.